Hello and welcome to Spitfire Presents. I'm here today with one of my favorite composers and humans, Simon Franglen. Simon, welcome. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. I mean, we do go back a while, don't we,
We do,
Roman?
and we're going to talk about it. I wanted to brag about you for just a moment, and then we're going to tell some war stories. If we have any
Yeah.
memory left in life. Simon is a Grammy winning, Golden Globe nominated composer and producer. He's had a huge impact on the music and film industries. In fact, Simon, I think I read not only have you sold millions and millions of soundtracks and been involved in those, but billions of movie tickets. In
I have no idea about that. I know that that there's been a
Well, I
lot.
think you've been certainly responsible for and involved in the music of some of the biggest films and records of the past 1,000 years. So I'm gonna go with that. I know you've worked with Quincy and David Foster, and of course James Horner and Craig Armstrong. We're gonna talk about on Moulin
Oh
Rouge,
yeah.
and you've done The Way of Water, your original score for The Way of Water, and I think we've caught you right in the middle of scoring what would be Avatar 3, Fire and Ash, with 4
Yep.
and 5 in the pipeline coming up. So lots to talk about, but I think before we find out a little bit about your current work, and I know you had a scoring session, yikes, tomorrow. So we've grabbed you in the middle here. But let's go back. You said we do go back a ways. First of all, I'm trusting that your memory is better than mine. I'm hoping.
Yeah.
But I do think we met on Titanic.
Definitely. The Titanic, I'm sure I may have done other stuff, but I know that Titanic was probably our first major job together.
And we were in Los Angeles, I believe, and you were responsible for putting together a little song I like to call My Heart Will Go On.
Hmm.
And you'd have to remind me a little bit about how that came about. My memory of it was that Jim Cameron said, I think the polite way of saying this is no fucking song at the end of my movie. You don't have the boat go down and the guy die, and we're not going to have a song. And then James and Will Jennings cut a demo with Celine.
The way that it went was that's the short version. It's absolutely correct.
Okay, good, because that's the myth that I've inherited and sort of was around, of course, because I knew that there'd been a demo cut and I wasn't supposed to know about it. But tell me what I'm missing there.
The backstory is that probably the first time I'd ever worked with James Horner, there was a another film that Celine was going to sing the theme for. Now, I'd worked with Celine a lot. I did most of those records in the 90s, the Celine, I did a lot of those big records. And so I knew her and I knew, her style because I've been in there with David Foster. We'd been making the Because You Love Me's and the I
Correct.
Have Nothing, not her, that's Whitney. Basically, we've done a lot of those Celine tracks. We're working on Titanic. Remember, Titanic had no money, as you remember. It was a microscopic budget because we had it was going to be the film that was going to bring down two studios, Fox and Paramount,
Correct.
and we had therefore the music budget was
I
tiny,
know
and I
exactly
was
what the music budget was, and I knew
I
that it was based on a ordinary amount of music, whatever that is in a film, and no one wanted to admit that the film was 3 hours long with 2 hours and 59 minutes of music wall to wall.
it wasn't just that. It was based on what Brad Fiedel had. budgeted for Terminator 2. And Jim had written this number down, and basically nobody was willing to shift one dime from that number.
Correct.
So I was the guy that could make computers sing at the time. I used a thing called the Synclavier, and I had racks and racks of synths and so on. And I would work with composers for long periods of time. I wouldn't just do a session. People would hire me for a film.
Mm-hmm.
And I was working with Alan Silvestri, who I'd done a number of films with. The great, genuinely great Alan Silvestri.
Mm-hmm.
And his agent was Mike Gorfain.
Yep.
And Mike Gorfain phoned me and said, look, another client of ours needs somebody to work with them in terms of doing mock-ups, inverted commas, or basically doing some synth work. Now, James Horner had another legendary synth player called Ian Underwood who worked with him.
And Frank Zappa.
Exactly, one of the original mothers of invention.
Yep.
And now one of my dearest friends.
Yep.
But Ian's thing was creating sounds and layering things. My stuff tended to be building entire tracks in the Synclavier, which had a sequencer, which is one of the first doors.
Yeah.
Digital, and therefore, so I go and see James, and he gives me an orchestration of the syncing and a super VHS cassette of the syncing, which was and says, "Look, can you see what it sounds like? Mock this up." And I do it. Everyone's really happy because they have somehow found a little bit more money for inverted commas demos. And therefore, I go to a place called Castle Oaks over in Calabasas, a tiny studio, and we set up a studio. And I have borrowed equipment, begged, borrowed, and stolen equipment from manufacturers. I borrowed a Mackie desk and 5 Mackie speakers. I had a rack of Tascam TA-G8s because that's what we could, and I became the engineer as well because we couldn't afford Sean Murphy at this point. And set up in this tiny studio, there was a room with 3 sets of keyboards behind me. There was Ian Underwood as you came through the door. Then there was James Horner's keyboard. Then there was a little gap with a deck chair in it, and then I was on the right, and Ian Underwood and I had our racks. I had 2 tons of equipment at that time. We put that out in the live room. He put his racks of equipment out in the live room. We wired it all into this Mackie desk, and I had a 5.1 that I literally borrowed from people because that's what we could afford.
Right.
We didn't have any money for rentals. And I recorded all the synths because as we're building cues, we were doing things like the first moment that we go down to see the wreck, when the Take Her to See Mr. Murdoch, this great, amazing cue, which a few years ago we did Titanic live. Right. And I and Jack Redford, the orchestrator, had to go back and look at what had actually been recorded. And I managed to get the music editorial stems from Joey Rand, who'd been one of the music editors on it. And we looked, and there was I thinking that Take Her to See Mr. Murdoch was this big orchestral cue. No, of the cue, which is maybe 4 minutes long, 3 minutes and 15 seconds of it are just synths, just Ian, James, and me. And then the last 45 seconds was orchestra because that's all we could afford. And through the score, if you listen to the score, part of the reason the score sounds the way that it does is so much of it is just synthetic, only because we couldn't afford a real orchestra. So the voices, da dum bum ba da dum bum ba da dum. There's these voices. Take a see, Mr. Murdoch. They're all fake because Ian and I made up a patch out of the Synclavier and about 6 or 7 different synths. That patch was meant to be replaced by the Harlem Boys Choir. James couldn't afford the Harlem Boys Choir, who he'd used on Glory. Right. So because of that, the patch stuck. And Jim was happy with what he was hearing. Jim had initially gone also saying, I'm not sure we need a big orchestral score. So we were creating this hybrid, and that deck chair in between Horner and me was where Jim Cameron would come in and sit in the deck chair and listen to cues as we went down. And often there would be a point where we'd do a chunk, and then he'd say, "Yeah, great, love it, but it's not in the movie anymore," and so on, which is a natural thing that happens. We're working for a while. At some point, James Horner gives me a piano sketch, which I have somewhere in a filing cabinet somewhere, of this song, which he's written with Will Jennings, called "My Heart Will Go On," that uses the themes that we're using throughout the film. And he said, "Could you demo this up for Celine?" And I said, "Yeah, of course. I've done records. I've produced records for Celine. I know exactly how, you know." So I build the track. Celine has agreed to sing the demo. And James and I, so we finished, I get the track ready. I remember I cut it in 3 different keys. I cut it in D flat, and I cut it in D, I cut it in E flat. Those days, you couldn't just pitch shift everything up the way that you can now. So I had to recut it each time in 3 different keys. Print them onto a DA88 so that, and Horner flies to New York, where my good friend Humberto Gatica was recording vocals with Celine. And I don't go there because I'm still busy finishing stuff for the film. There just isn't time. James takes the red eye to New York, goes and records the vocal, and comes back, brings me the tape.
Which
the tape
key?
has.
Do you remember?
This is the problem. It should have been in D because we have finished the film in D. Unfortunately, James, who normally had very good perfect pitch, was jet lagged, and said to the assistant said, "Which version?" James said, "Well, maybe the D version." The guy didn't read the D flat, put the D flat version in. So now we have a demo in D flat. There are 6 tracks of vocals in there. I do a comp of the vocals so that we get something that absolutely works for what we need. The problem is I then mix a demo. And the mix the demo, do everything. Everything is in the synclavier. It is exactly what you hear. We do add Tony Hinnigan playing penny whistle, but everything else is the keyboards and the synclavier and everything else. I make a cassette that James carries around in his pocket for 6-8 weeks, something like that, 6 weeks, waiting for the moment to play Jim this demo.
He wanted to find Cameron in a good mood, I once remember him saying.
Absolutely. So he's carrying around the cassette. And eventually, James plays it to Jim, and Jim falls in love with it immediately and said, "This is how the film should end." And it was absolutely the right thing to do because the song encapsulates the whole of the film in 1 3.5-minute segment. Now, we had 2 problems. One was that the song, that as he heard it, was now in D flat. We had a film score that ended in D, and there was this horrible mess. So we had to now record. If you listen to the end of the film, you will hear this sudden key change where the last 3, like there's a last 30 seconds of Alan willing to whatever to leave or whatever the last cue is, suddenly, or memories. I'm trying to think which one was called, a sea full of memories or something. Basically, there's a key change in there that we had to rebuild the whole end of the film to get so that we didn't end up with a horrible, like a mess of stuff together. And we do that, but I'm then everyone's going, "Oh, this is brilliant! This is brilliant!" I said, "Great, okay." So James and Horner and I are producing this version together. I said, "Well, I need to do the things I do with the Celine record. I need to call in, Michael Thompson on guitars and Dean Parks and all the people we do, and then." The guys that I would work with on records. And I get told, "No, you're not allowed to change a thing. Jim loves this. Don't change anything. If you add things, then maybe he doesn't like it as much." So I go to record plant. I'm allowed. They eventually relinquished to allow me to arrange the key change and use live orchestra for the key change. So and when the final major key changing, that's real orchestra. Everything before that is the synclavier. And I go to record plant. I mix the surround mix you hear in the cinema. Sean Murphy is also working on the score at this point, and is doing some live recording with orchestra and mixing.
I was
So
there.
I
Todd
mixed
A.O. We went to Todd A.O.
Yeah, but they are so worried that something's going to change that I then mix it at record plant. They don't want me to have anybody. They want me to do it myself because they want it to sound exactly the way that Jim likes it. So I mix it the way that you hear it in the film, and that's what you hear at the end of the movie. It all came because there was a piano sketch, and again, it works, and it works beautifully.
And then we sell 30 million CDs, and whatever you did, whatever magic fairy dust you sprinkled on that track worked. And I'd forgotten, and I feel a little bit of that same stomach ache of the budget issue, which was also my battle because I knew how much it was going to cost, all of this. And the studios, Paramount and Fox, said, we are so, at this point, the movie was tens of millions of dollars over budget. So asking for another $50,000 to finish a score, or $150,000, was so dramatic. And James Horner was unable to do the work. And boy, I was so in the middle of going to the studio heads to say, can I have another, a few quid so the guy can mix the score? But it's amazing to hear all this. And thankfully, I was told, you should let them figure it out. You get involved, we're going to spend money. Let them figure it out. They're going to figure it out. And I didn't realize any of this until you just told me. And it makes me wonder so many things about it, though it just all unbelievably worked out. Of course, the thing that worked out the most was in the few weeks, remember the Titanic release date changed.
Oh, yeah, July the 3rd.
Right. And everyone around us said, this is going to be the end of Fox. It's going to sink the entire studio. You went so far over budget. And then P.S., and I think your record stayed #1 for 10 weeks. My Heart Will Go On. Won the...
Yeah, it was, I'm proud of that.
Yeah.
And I think it was one of those times when the song encapsulated the film. It's what a film song should do, which is the film song should be connected to the film and should feel like it tells you the story either in the section of the film that you're in, or at the end it tells you the story of the film that you've just watched.
But also musically, I love what you said, is that it takes melodies that you've loved and heard and weaves them into a song. And it was such a template for, I'd tell a filmmaker or a songwriter, it's like My Heart Will Go On, and they'd roll their eyes and say, what, I'm supposed to, that's the greatest film song after Moon River, or maybe Somewhere Over the Rainbow. And, but those are melodic aspects of the score. It's the greatest way to write a film song. It makes me wonder, was there drama on Moulin Rouge that I missed? I remember.
I think that's all right. I'm just going to press a button there. Moulin Rouge, you guys brought me in. I was brought in to
for Come What May.
Yeah, so I produced Come What May with David Foster, but I was also there. What was decided was that I had to produce the vocals for the various actors.
Yeah.
So I had, actually it was him. I had Nicole, Ewan was in London. I did remote with Ewan, but I had the various actors came here, and I worked extensively with Nicole on getting her vocals the way you hear it in Moulin Rouge.
This was long before auto-tuning, with all due respect. It was comping
We
and
hadn't.
1,000 takes.
It was also about getting the acting to feel right. I mean, so I'd worked on enough records with enough singers. This was about making a vocal that you believed on screen, that you actually sat there and it told you, again, tells you the story, that a musical vocal, especially on a film, needs to connect with the audience. It has to have that tactile quality that makes you feel the character. It can't just be a song that plays back in the background. Mm. And I think the thing that I discovered with Nicole was that she had a phenomenal ability to act her vocals. It was really, really impressive. And then it was a case about getting the performance of the song as a song to be as great as it could be, making sure that every note was the way it should be before we had autotune, before we had Melodyne and so on. This was about her performing it. As you said, it was about creating a vocal and making sure that at the end of it, people understood how well she could sing.
Yeah.
And I know I'm focusing on Nicole, but it was because she had more really hard vocals to sing. You know, the Someday I'll Fly Away and so on. These were vocals sung by great singers with enormous ranges. And she had to sing that vocal as a great vocal, but also she had to act it so that you believed the character.
Yeah.
And that was something that that was the key. At this point, so I think that what my job was just to make you believe the vocals and make you understand the characters in terms of the songs that they did.
And boy, that worked. And I had the weird responsibility of having to kind of assure the studio that we would get vocals that were believable from Nicole and Ewan. Strangely enough, it came up again on Walk the Line. Can you get Reese Witherspoon and Joaquin Phoenix to sing? Great actors. First of all, it's never surprising me that a great actor also can sing. It just, that it's not like that talent is divorced from being a great actor. But you're right. You have to be able to sing as a component of acting. It makes me wonder, you've worked with Foster, and here you are with these great talents. But you also, I know, started with one of my favorite record producers and humans in the world, and that's Trevor. And
give me 1 second to do one thing.
Yes.
Here, and I will
fire away.
There we go. That was,
isn't that great? Look at that. That's a cue. That's a cue that we're going to hear in Avatar. Whatever's behind Simon, don't copy that down, sports fans.
But I started with Trevor Horn.
And
that
you
was
brought a
first
synclav into, was it SARM or was it here?
He had one. This is the
wow, that's cool.
I was working in a tiny, tiny, tiny studio in London. They had a thing called the PPG Wave and Wave Term, and it was one of the first music computers, but it had a problem, which is it broke down all the time.
That's no good.
It broke down so often I had to go back to the distributors every week to 10 days to get it fixed. Now, the thing was, the distributors had also distributed this thing called the Synclavier, which was the world's most expensive music computer. All the top artists in the world, all the top producers had Synclaviers. The guy who was the distributor for the PPG and for the Synclavier looked at me and called Trevor and said, "You should hire this kid." And I get a call from Trevor and his wife, Jill Sinclair, and they say, "Come and have a chat." So I go down there. This is December, and they say, "Yeah, you're going to become our Synclavier programmer." So I
By the way,
go and
for those of you that don't know, the Synclav was not easy to program.
There's a manual, so there's about an enormous like a wall of manuals.
It was just insane.
So I have to go and learn. December, I take all the manuals home with me, which are, I don't know, several thousand pages.
Yep.
And I read them from cover to cover, every version, everything else. And I start the studio January the 5th. January the 6th, they put me in with a studio with Yes. And who at this point are the biggest band in the world. And I am meant to start working with Yes immediately. So that was the baptism of fire. And working for Trevor was an absolute education. It was.
Tell me, can you think of something that, I mean,
well,
you can think of anything you learned from Trevor, because I learned so much from Trevor, but is there anything that, when you said an absolute education, in what way?
It was first of all, he had this, the care that he took to find space for things was something that you really hear. If you listen to a Trevor Horn record, there is always a sense of space. You know, you listen to, Yes, you listen to Frank Goes to Hollywood, you go and listen to Seal, you listen to Propaganda, you aim to listen, which also, Steve Lipson, so I was working also with Lippo a lot. And all of these records, they were, first of all, the quality of the engineering was unsurpassed. So we had, we were at, because Trevor and Jill owned Psalm Studios where I was working, one of the advantages if you own your own studio, and in those days, the budgets for records it was whatever it took to make the record great. And that meant that there was time to really, really make things sound interesting, make things unique. And if you needed to re-record something 3 times to make it right, that's what you did. If you needed to re-record it 10 times to make it right, that's what it was right. And I learned there was something about working for Trevor. I discovered, there were things that I would do. It was about pushing boundaries, I think, is the thing that I learned most from Trevor, was that point of don't look for what you did in the past, look for what you should be looking at for the future. And grabbing things, if you take Slave to the Rhythm, I worked on some of the remixes, but that was also something, but this was maybe a year after it came out, they were still doing remixes. I'd first heard it on the radio and just sat there going, like everybody else did. And it was things like grabbing Go-Go from Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
You listen to the groove, which is in Slave to Rhythm, which is this this go-go rhythm, and stuff, and that understanding of groove. And I think if I look throughout my career, one thing that I have been known for is my groove. And that's why I did a lot of R&B records. I did a lot of urban and so on, because people liked the groove that I had. And part of that is there's some tricks that I used in the synclavier that the synclavier allowed me to do that I still use today, that just allow a groove to sit in a way that I think people enjoyed.
Wow.
I take that groove, that idea of groove, with me to every cue I write, because I have a thing. People know I say you need head bob. The point is when you can get their heads and their backsides moving, and get their heart rate going with you, then everything else sort of flows. It's if people look at the cues I've worked on, even when I was working for other composers, I'm hoping people enjoyed the grooves for what they were, and that came from records, that came from Trevor, but also out here working with Quincy and other people and David, but having the ability to sit with John Robinson or
the great JR.
Exactly, or the great Vinny Colaiuta, all these percussionists, and the great percussionists I've worked with as well. But you take Vinny. One of the things that the synclavier allowed me to do was sit there and actually almost dissect people's grooves. I would. I was doing this on Yes. I was looking for how Alan White played, and Alan was this amazing drummer. And I discovered, just because we were doing a track where we were trying to do an incredibly complex thing, one of the most complex things I've ever done, and still to this date in terms of sound. And one of that things that required was me to learn how Alan actually sat a groove. And you start analyzing, and you started realizing the way people pushed the kick, or they lagged the snare, and so on. And I started developing a style for myself, which was based on how I pushed the kick and how I maybe lagged the snare. And that became part of that still translates today to the way that an action track, if I've got an action groove, I want that groove to feel in a particular way, and I will adjust everything, including the orchestra. I will be telling the orchestra, no, I was talking to an orchestra and I said, this has to have that sense of headbang. It has to be a head-banging groove. You need to feel like that. Or I will say, no, this needs to have, you need to feel like your arse is moving in the right thing, and getting the string players to just start feeling as if they are settling into the beat the way. And that's just part of where I come from.
It's really interesting to start to see how your record producing translates into film scoring. I mean, that is, in some ways, you are ahead of the curve. Now, of course, we have Trent Reznor and different record makers, all of them. There was a moment where there were a lot of people from the record business. There were musical artists trying to score films, and it wasn't working. They didn't understand the discipline. They didn't understand that they couldn't go on tour in the middle of the movie and they'll come back and we'll figure it, but my band has to tour. But you have actually encapsulated this kind of career making grooves and making records. And I don't think of film music necessarily as groove oriented, because I always thought that's more of a song vibe than a cue vibe. But now to hear you say it, it makes me wonder. I mean, in Avatar, for example, the Avatar that you're working on right now, which is 3.
Yeah.
Are there grooves in?
Oh, absolutely.
And tell me, tell us where you are in that process. I know you said you have a date this week. How are you finishing the film, recording the film?
Oh, no. I'm in the early stages of this. I'm recording some early stuff because Jim is happy with where I am.
Okay.
And the sound is going to evolve. I think this score is going to surprise people. I think people will. He's already said about
texturally or
texturally. I think this is it's by far, by a country mile, the most complex project I've ever worked on.
Wow, that's exciting.
In terms of the level of the hybrid level of this, I've always brought, because my day job was using computers and music. That was where I came in. I mean, you talked about Trent Reznor. I worked with Howard Shore on a number of films. Mm-hmm. One of them was Seven, where my job there was to manipulate the orchestra. Howard asked me to do things like take the orchestra, put it through a fuzz box. I was layering distorted dystopian sounds underneath the orchestra to get this hybrid approach. But on Fire and Ash, we have the new Ash tribe that we've discovered. They need a whole new identity. There's new characters, there's new things. They all need characters and themes. And I hope that one thing I've learned from the people I worked for is I think of myself as a thematic composer. Mm-hmm. I like tunes. I think tunes are an essential part of film scores. I'm not a textural composer. I think, it was something that Jim asked of me when we started working on 2. He said, I need leitmotifs. I need themes for these characters. Mm-hmm. And And probably also because I came from records, the idea of a good tune is something that we carry with us.
Studios
And
like them too.
yeah, and
Studios like memorable tunes and scores and are baffled often when the modern scores are textural and ambient because directors are concerned if they're tuneful, you're going to manipulate the audience when in fact it's all manipulation. So I love that there are tunes in your work.
and it resonates. It provides, it provides that thing that allows, the job as of a film composer is of psychological manipulation.
Mm-hmm.
Is there as we're there to give that sense of, we're there to tell you the story under the story. We're there to tell you how to feel rather than where to think.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, I use all of the techniques I can possibly come up with to manipulate your emotions, and that's a necessary part of film scoring. I think one of the things that, well, I come from being a session player and a record producer. It's a trusted way of working, and I'm not trying to compare myself at this point. I'm just going to mention just styles, but there was a piano player called Johnny Williams. Who went from being, Henry Mancini's pianist and Alfred Newman's pianist, to then being a conductor and effectively like a producer, then became a composer.
Yeah.
There was Hans, Lily Yard in London doing commercials and so on, and then becoming a programmer for other people, and then becoming a producer, and then becoming a composer. James Newton Howard.
Of course.
Keyboard player for other people, and then an arranger for other people. You think of those great arrangements for Toto, and then a film composer. I think one of the things about coming that way, like I have, and there's probably another dozen people like that I can mention off the top of my head, which was that we were used to a life in the studio. We were used to adaptability, to the idea of making changes quickly, of being able to also, we come across, 100 different characters. Directors are very different. They all have different styles. They have different ways. One of the things about coming from the studio world was you understood the studio world, but you also understood that dynamic of the control room, which is such an essential part of being a successful composer. Is that the director has want to be in a room with you, and they also, more importantly, they have to be able to communicate. They have to be able to tell you in their language, and the important thing is that a film composer has to translate director speak into music, or producer speak into music. It may be that they do not know the right musical term. They may not know anything about music. Jim will tell me that he knows nothing about how to talk about music, but he tells me exactly how his music should feel. Mm-hmm. And so that's a thing that I worked out. He and I have a language that we've got now in terms of that collaboration, which allows me to translate his feelings about what he wants from the music into a score that can be a score. Yeah. And a great composer, if you look at the way that John Williams works with Spielberg or with Lucas, or you look at what Hans has done with Villeneuve or any of the other people around, there's obviously that connection with them where they are able to translate the hope and the emotional wish of the director into music. We're not there to own the music. The film owns the music.
Yeah.
And we're there just to act as this tool for the director to create the score. Now, that does mean sometimes if you have a director who is actually heading the wrong way, that you end up with the wrong score for the film.
Yeah.
And that can happen. And that often, I've never blamed composers for bad scores.
Well, there are directors that have a fantasy about what their film is. I found that wasn't what the film was. They thought it was a certain film, and they asked the composer to score the film that's in their head, but the composer has to gently confront the fact that it's not funny here, or it's not that scary here, and I know you want it to be that, but that's not what ended up on film. I want to ask just a little bit about the process right now. If you came from Synclaves and then all those incredible experiences you had with all the original synthesizers, now are you using fantastic samples, lots of vintage synths? I mean, you're really one of the experts in the manipulation of synthetic sounds in addition to orchestras. Is there a toolkit that you are currently in the middle of? Because I know it keeps evolving. And do you miss your Synclav?
The Synclavier, I still have it.
Oh, great. Yeah.
It still sounds astonishing. People don't understand. There was something about the filters, the way that it sampled up to 100 kilohertz, and the quality of the Synclavier. You can hear, it still sounds amazing. But I write in Pro Tools, which is unusual, and the reason I do that is I've worked out a workflow that works with me, and as people will know, I've been associated with Spitfire, for instance, for a long time. Yeah. I was one of the original 25 people who bought the bespoke library that came out. And the reason we all paid the money, it was expensive at the time. It was expensive now, actually. The reason we bought it was that it made demos sound better. It made that conversation with the director much more clear. I remember. I think they came out just as I was starting to work on Avatar 1, and the difference was that suddenly sound libraries that had been at the time had a very they sounded artificial. Everything had been tuned perfectly. Everything was like the levels were all evened out. And suddenly here came this library where you could hear the squeak at the end of some of the samples on a chair, or maybe that cello note was not quite in tune. But you also heard these amazing players, these London players, recorded at Air Studios by Jake Jackson, doing a great job. So it was like it had been recorded the way that we would expect it to be recorded, using the players that we would hope to use in London at one of the world's great studios. And this was like a game changer for everything. And suddenly, a violin line sounded like real violins as compared to everything else that we had at the time. Now, obviously, my template has evolved over the years. Now I'm running enormous rigs of Vienna Ensemble Pro with 1,000 contacts running and running every possible library. I built a template that I think sounds so real that often it's remarkably close to the real orchestra. Now, the real orchestra still beats it, but it does mean that for instance, on Avatar 2, there are moments when you're hearing my demo rather than the finished article.
Would it be fair to say that Spitfire is somewhere on Pandora?
Oh, Spitfire has been part of Pandora since Avatar 1. It's an essential part of the toolkit.
That's amazing.
I have a lot of synths and stuff like that. I still have stuff in storage and whatever else. But the reality of my world and the way that I work is that I am largely in the box. I see a lot of composers who tell me, who have these, they say, I'm using all these modulars and everything else. When you actually talk to them further, you discover that what they're actually doing is they're making a sound, they're sampling it, they're putting it into whatever, another thing like Omnisphere or Contact, and they are manipulating it there. Because the problem we have is we have to be able to recall. And recall is the most essential part of my life. I can't have a situation where I go to a cue and somebody then cuts it. The director or the editor, suddenly there's like 30 seconds cut out of this cue. If I go back to my demo, I have to be able to recall it exactly the way that it was. Because if I don't, for instance, the director has said yes to this, If it suddenly changes everything, then suddenly he or she is presented with something completely different. I need to be able to find that sound. Also, the new software that we have available to us, the quality of the plugins, the quality of the virtual instruments that we have, are so ludicrously good that I can also manipulate them in such a way that I know that I get as good a sound as I do with the real thing. I know people will say that's sacrilegious, but as a person who owns the real thing as
Yeah.
well, I have done my cold test and said, right, okay, in the cold light of day, if I bring up that Oberheim that I have over here, right, I can sit there and then try and recall the sound that I had, or I can make something that sounds like it or better. Because part of the sound that I create, my sound is based on layering.
Yeah.
It's something that I feel, especially in films abhor static. They abhor things where sound is set. So you need to have texture, you need to have depth in there. And so a lot of what I build is textural depth, and that's percussion. That's also pads. It may be vocal sounds. It might be like the reason we talked about the Titanic. There was the vocal sound on the Titanic is made up of 7 different synths and the synclavier, because that's what it took to make the sound the way that it needed to be. And this is something, an approach I've taken where I will take a flavor from this or take a flavor from that, and I will put those all together, and that's my sound. It's a blend. I do it on a per cue basis. It's rare that I go to a straight template. I tend to start evolving sounds as I go along.
Simon, I think it's just incredible. I think you are leading the way for a number of composers in your because in your approach, because your experience is really the culmination of so many things. You also made me realize today that in some ways, I never thought of this, the producer of a record has to pay attention to the artist the way the composer of a film has to pay attention to the director, and that you are really serving a couple different masters in a way. Unless you are the artist, you're producing that artist's record. So if the artist says, I'm not sure that works, you have to work with that. If the director says that cue doesn't work, you have to work with that. But Simon, I'm just glad we had a chance to talk. We could go on, and we will go on for many hours. And I think what we do is we save that for the release of Fire and Ash.
I think people are going to be surprised
when I
by
get
this.
to hear it, I can't wait. I really can't. I like to be immersed in your scores and start to really understand and wonder what is the texture, the melody, the concept behind each cue. So, Simon, I just wanted to thank you today. I don't want to keep you from your session. I think you have a choral session coming up, so I appreciate the fact that you gave us some time in the middle of this incredible moment in your career and your life. I really appreciate it, and I'm looking forward to catching up after Fire and Ash is released, goes number 1, and sells another $1 billion worth of movie tickets.
I hope so too. I think if we at the moment we're it's I'm I think people are it's gonna I think people are going to be pretty amazed by what they're
I
seeing. It's astonishing.
I'm certain. So,
Yeah.
thank you, my friend. I'm sure I'll see you around
Yes.
and about, and I just appreciate your time. So, and I'm sure Spitfire does as well.
I've known Paul since whenever it is, a long, long time, and obviously Robert, I've known you even longer.
That's amazing. We all go way back. I think that's one of the
We do.
key features that people don't realize is surviving. Simply staying around long enough that you have a crew that you can actually say, remember when? So, Simon, we'll make some
Yeah,
more memories, and I appreciate your time.
and you too.
See you. That was really fun for me to hear a lot of the backstory of movies I worked on and didn't know exactly what was going on, particularly Titanic and Moulin Rouge. I mean, I knew what was going on. It was my responsibility to deliver the score. But of course, you never know as the head of a department, the music division, you're looking forward to getting the score done. You don't know how much anxiety and stress and drama is going on behind the scenes. So to hear Simon tell that story about Titanic was absolutely brilliant. And speaking of which, Carol, do you think we could get you to honor us with
Oh,
a performance of
it would be my honor.
one of the great movie songs? That would be really special. I think it would be important. I assume you're going to sing too.
I don't think anyone would want to hear that, but I will do my best.
Oh, I'm looking forward to it, and I
That
think
was
a lot
amazing,
yeah.
by the way. Yeah, I was
great.
really, I'm honored to have been listening to that conversation.
Simon is amazing, and what an amazing career. And I kind of have the instinct that the amazingness is going to continue. So,
I'm so excited for Avatar 3.
yeah,
That
it's going to be amazing. As they said, I think if I say the word amazing again,
amazing.
I get
You'll get
it would be
you'll get-
amazing. Ladies and gentlemen, without further, and the word is adieu, I'm going to introduce composer Carol playing one of the great songs from the world of film music. Carol, have fun, and I'll see you soon.